Thank you for tuning in to tonight's episode of Prince Hall Think Tank. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to view them on feel free to post them on our Facebook page. And if we have any time at the end of the conversation, we will answer some of those questions. For a disclaimer, the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the Grand Lodge and lodges from which we hold membership. All right, so now we're going to start with our introductions. So, Brother Collins, you're up first.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry, I had to get that in. The 16th national champions from the great state of Alabama. I'm Ken Collins. I serve as the Grand Lodge historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama, where Cordy Hawkins is my Grand Master, and the Right Honorable Reverend Timothy Sanford is my Worshipful Master. I'm a member of Pride of North Birmingham Lodge number 319. Definitely want to say Happy New Year to everyone. We're glad to see everybody after the New Year. Glad to know that everyone's doing well. We survived snowpocalypse up here in D.C. James up in northern Maryland. I'm down here in southern Maryland. So we survived it, and it's good to be back with everybody. And we're really looking forward to today's discussion because we really want to get into the uncomfortable conversations that need to be had, and basically seeing a reality that people like to try to hide behind the niceties of recognition, but we rather get in it and get in the dirty conversation and put the stuff on the table. But again, it's good to be with everybody. Congratulations to the Alabama Crimson Tide, Roll Tide, and good to see everybody again.
All right, thank you, Brother Collins. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Dave Gillard, past master of the Mount Episcopal Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia, where Johnny R. Williams serves as Worshipful Master, and it operates under the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, where the Honorable Bruce A. James serves as Grand Master. Happy New Year to everybody. Glad to be here. Go Knicks, as always. And Brother Morgan, you're up next.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everybody. My name is James R. Morgan III. I currently serve as Worshipful Master of Corinthian Lodge number 18, where we are 1 month out from our 100th birthday as a lodge. So we're very thankful for that. I also serve as the Worshipful Associate Grand Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, where the Honorable Norman L. Campbell is our Most Worshipful Grand Master. I'm very happy to be here. I want to welcome our guests tonight, and hopefully we have an enjoyable discussion.
All right, Brother Collins.
Once again, Happy New Year to everybody. My name is Preston Collins Jr. I am the current Worshipful Master of Toussaint Lodge number 19, right here in Hamilton, Ohio, operating under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, where my Grand Master is the Honorable Carl Williams. And like I said, Happy New Year to everybody. Thank you guys for having me again on the show. It's an honor to be here.
All right, thank you, Brother Collins. It's definitely been a pleasure having you on. And now we have another special guest who is the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas, who will introduce himself.
Good evening, brothers. My name is Wilbert M. Curtis. I'm the Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of Texas in its jurisdiction. I understand that Grand Master in Texas is a pretty good guy. That's what I heard. So I will, if y'all don't mind, I will tell him that the next time I see him. It's a pleasure for me to be on here, and hopefully I can bring a little insight on the mutual recognition in the jurisdiction of Texas, and hopefully this will be a benefit to all, if not all, most jurisdictions. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Most Worshipful Grandmaster Curtis, for accepting the invite to be on this show. And you also made history because you're the first Grandmaster that will be on our show. Right. So, for tonight's show, the title is An Incomplete Brotherhood, Recognition and Amity, the Conundrum the conundrum in the American South. We're going to talk about recognition, history, some of the events that led up to why we are in the position that we are in now in the American South. We're also going to come up with a couple of solutions and what recognition looks like in the North as well. So to start off with the first presentation, we're going to go with Brother James Morgan.
Oh, thank you, Brother Gillon. Okay, so I'm not doing a slideshow this episode. I'm just going to kind of talk through some of the overarching issues so that we can get down to the nitty-gritty and let our guests have their time as they well deserve. To understand recognition within the Masonic world, first thing you have to understand is this, is that as a fraternity, it's very important because of the right of visitation, to be able to visit with other lodges, fellowship, enjoy yourselves. We've kind of talked about that a little bit before. You know, all five of us here are all members of different lodges, different states, but we can interact on a Masonic level outside of the Prince Hall think tank, okay, which is very important, and any Mason out there knows that. Now, the issue at hand that has affected the Prince Hall affiliation for really all of its existence is recognition, because at the time that Prince Hall Masonry was established, at the time African Lodge 459 was established in the 1700s, and then as you had Grand Lodges being created throughout the 1800s, as we know, any social studies student in middle school can tell you, the great peculiar institution, the original sin of the United States was the sin of slavery, of chattel slavery of people of African descent. I know in my family it happened. Pretty sure in the other brothers here tonight's families it happened, and it probably happened in your family too if you're watching this to some extent or the other. Okay, the issue that people have to understand is that it was a legal system set in place that not only had people of African descent in slavery, but it also created a situation where there's a vacuum in legislation. Even when you look at the Constitution, there really was no standing for free people of color. So when you have people like a Prince Hall or others who are free people who really don't have citizenship, but yet they're not slaves, that puts them in a very, very gray zone legally as well as socially. Over time, what you see is the growth of social institutions, because what was becoming the African American community still needed certain services performed for them, as well as entertainment and things for their leisure hours. So, for example, in the Caucasian community, you would have the Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, or what have you, and then in the African American community, you end up finding the African Methodist Episcopal Church. When you look at situations such as burial societies, fraternal organizations, not just Freemasonry, okay, when you look at other fraternal organizations that existed at that time period, you start seeing division along racial lines, and that was in part because in some states that was either the rule of the day in terms of the letter of the law, or it was the understood social order of the day. Okay, so what ends up happening is you have a situation now where black men are not being allowed to join Masonic lodges, in part because of their perceived status. Now, whether or not it was true didn't matter. Their perceived status is either having been slaves or having formerly been slaves or runaways or poor, or what any kind of stereotype you want to claim. That was cast on the vast majority of black men in this country's history when they sought entry into Freemasonry. And as you hear the word Freemasonry, not to get too much into the ritualistic side, but there's certain elements in there that would lead one to say, hey, a slave cannot be a Mason, former slave, what have you. So it creates that division. Just to give you an example of a testimony from the time period of our patron Saint Prince Hall, you'll see that Dr. Jeremy Belknap, who was a good friend of Prince Hall, wrote this in the year 1795. He said, "I shall add the following note, written by a white gentleman of the craft of good information and candor. The African Lodge, though possessing a charter from England, meet by themselves, and white Masons, not any more skilled in geometry, will not acknowledge them. The reason given is that blacks were made clandestinely in the first place, which if known would have prevented them from receiving a charter. But this inquiry would not have been made about white lodges, many of which have not conformed to the rules of Masonry. The truth is, they are ashamed of being on equality with blacks. Even the fraternal kiss of France, given to merit without distinction of color, doth not influence Massachusetts Masons to give an embrace less emphatically to their black brethren. They, on the other hand, valuing themselves on their knowledge of the craft, think themselves better Masons in other respects than the whites, because Masonry considers all men equal who are free, and our laws admit no kind of slavery. It is evident from this, that neither avowedly nor tacitly do the blacks admit the preeminence of the whites, but it is as evident that a preeminence is claimed by the whites. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of what that political and the social climate was at the time that Prince Hall Freemasonry was established. As I said earlier, this was not an anomaly in the social world of America at that time to have separate institutions. I mean, we live in a country where in my own parents' lifetime you had black and white water fountains. So this was a understood thing at that time. And regardless of the paperwork, the history, the lineage, black Freemasons in this country were considered to not be true Freemasons by their Caucasian counterparts for the majority of our history. And in some places, one can argue that that's still the case. So hopefully we will get to discuss a little bit more about that this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentation, Brother Morgan. And just for the viewers, you can post your questions on our event page. If you go to the actual event for this show, you can submit your questions there, or to the Prince Hall Think Tank page. But feel free to ask whatever question you are. Given the climate of this topic, try to keep your questions professional. If it gets too out of hand, of course, we'll have to delete those questions. But feel free to ask your questions, and if we have time at the end of the show, we'll try to answer as many as we can. All right, the next presenter is going to be Worshipful Master Collins.
Thank you, Brother Gillard. My segment of the show is going to be about the concept of recognition and also the concept of regularity. It's interesting that this is our topic for this show, because the last show we did, I ended it by making a statement about skin color and recognition, which is the truth. Skin color has absolutely nothing to do with your regularity or recognition. But let's start. I've only got a few slides that I need to go through. I think it's like 5 at the most, so just bear with me for a second. Okay, so let's talk about the differences in recognition and regularity. Number one, regardless of what anyone says, there is no worldwide authority on Freemasonry. And what that means is that there is no one Grand Lodge that controls every other Grand Lodge in the world. Each Grand Lodge is sovereign unto itself and its jurisdiction, and it makes up its own rules within its jurisdiction. Regularity is definite, recognition is subjective. Basically, what that means is regularity is a one-way street. Either you're regular or you're not. Recognition is subjective, meaning that a Grand Lodge, once again, with Grand Lodges being sovereign, a Grand Lodge can choose to recognize whatever Grand Lodge it so chooses to. And your two different types of regularity are regularity of origin and regularity of practice. And the most important bullet on this slide, a Grand Lodge must first be regular to be considered for recognition. So let's talk about regularity of origin. In order to have regularity of origin, a Grand Lodge must be able to trace its lineage to one of the 3 mother Grand Lodges of the world. They're called the Mother Grand Lodges because, quite simply, they were the first 3 Grand Lodges established in this world. You have the United Grand Lodge of England, and you have, in the parentheses, I have the dates 1717, 1751, and 1813 for the fact that the premier or modern Grand Lodge of England was formed in 1717. The ancient Grand Lodge of England was formed in 1751, and those 2 bodies merged together in 1813 to form the United Grand Lodge of England. You also have the Grand Lodge of Ireland, which was formed in 1725, and you have the Grand Lodge of Scotland, which was formed in 1736. All legitimate Grand Lodges are descended from at least one of these 3 Grand Lodges. That's an important note there. And you also have what is called regularity of practice. Now, as I stated before, there is no worldwide authority on Freemasonry. However, there are a set of what they refer to as ancient landmarks in the legitimate Masonic world that most Grand Lodges agree on. I know the Conference of Grand Masters of North America and the Conference of Grand Masters of Prince Hall Affiliation agree upon these things. And those quote unquote ancient landmarks would be: number one, you have to have a belief in a supreme being in order to become a Freemason. Your Grand Lodge membership must be male only. There must be a volume of sacred law, which is part of the furniture of the lodge. A Grand Lodge governs the 3 craft degrees of entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. A Grand Lodge is the highest Masonic authority within its jurisdiction. Basically, what that means is that a Grand Lodge cannot answer to another Grand Lodge. My Grand Lodge here in Ohio, the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, answers to the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio. In legitimate Freemasonry, Grand Masters don't have anyone basically, quote unquote, over them that can tell them what to do in their jurisdiction. And also, there should be no discussion of religion or politics in the lodge. That's not all of the quote-unquote ancient landmarks, but those are the ones that I wanted to focus on tonight, which spell out an organization's regularity of practice. Now, let's talk about recognition a little bit. Recognition is a two-way street, which means input and output is needed from both organizations involved. A Grand Lodge must first be regular in order to be recognized. And all that's saying is that no legitimate Grand Lodge is going to recognize a Grand Lodge that does not have regularity of both origin and practice. Another thing is, it is generally customary for the younger Grand Lodge to petition the elder Grand Lodge for recognition. And so basically, that's self-explanatory. It means that if my Grand Lodge was formed in 1849, but we wanted to establish recognition with the Grand Lodge that was formed in 1817, it would be the general custom for my Grand Lodge to reach out to that Grand Lodge to request mutual recognition. And also, both Grand Lodges must vote to recognize each other. That ties in with the first bullet of recognition being a two-way street, because there is no true mutual recognition until the matter is brought before the body at both Grand Lodges, is voted on by the voting members of that Grand Lodge, and approved. And I would be remiss if to have a discussion about recognition and not mention the Prince Hall Grand Lodge and the Grand Lodge, the Grand Lodge of Ohio. I'm trying to stop sharing my screen here. In 1897, there was a group of, I believe, 2 African American Freemasons who were members of what we now know as Prince Hall Grand Lodges in the state of Washington. They sent a petition basically to the Grand Lodge of Washington asking for permission to be able to fellowship, to visit with lodges subordinate to their Grand Lodge. Well, the Grand Master of Washington at that time, his name was Most Worshipful William Upton. He put together a committee. The committee reported back to their Grand Lodge basically that everything about Prince Hall Masonry was regular. And the Grand Lodge of Washington subsequently voted to recognize Prince Hall Masonry, or what is now known as Prince Hall Masonry, all the way back in 1897. Now, subsequent to that, I believe it was 17 Grand Lodges immediately pulled recognition from the Grand Lodge of Washington for this. And, and because of that, the next year, the Grand Lodge of Washington voted to rescind their earlier vote from the year before. So that ended the recognition between those 2 Grand Lodges. As I've stated before, and I'll state again, regularity and recognition have nothing to do with the color of your skin. It's all based on the legitimacy of the Grand Lodge that you're a member of, number one. Number two, it basically boils down to the prerogative of the other Grand Lodge. Grand Lodge recognition is subjective. A Grand Lodge can recognize who it chooses to recognize, and it cannot recognize who it chooses to not recognize. And that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for that presentation, Brother Collins. And that is interesting to know about Grandmaster William H. Upton. And another thing that he wanted to do as well was that he didn't want any type of Masonic headstone until the two Grand Lodges could meet together as brothers. And when that did happen, they had a big ceremony to actually mark that moment when they put the Masonic headstone on his grave. Now, for more information about this,
I'm sorry, Brother Gillum. I just wanted to mention also that ceremony. A lot of people don't know is actually online on YouTube. You can actually go back and watch it. It's not high def. It was filmed on VHS or something, but it's online if anyone wants to look it up after the show. Don't stay right where you are.
And for this report, if you can Google it. And it's on Google Books. It's the Grand Lodge of Michigan. It's the mainstream Grand Lodge of Michigan's 1899 proceedings. Once you Google that, you find it on Google Books. And you look at those proceedings, and you look under the report on Negro Masonry. That's going to tell you everything that was going on with William H. Upton, and I believe the name was Conrad Rideout, and those members of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Washington establishing recognition. So next, we're going to have Most Worshipful Grand Master Wilbur Curtis do his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Brother Gillett. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
The topic of my presentation is Texas strategy and what it looks like in Texas. First, I want to thank Brother Collins and all who had a part in allowing me to take part in this conversation on mutual recognition. I do have a little experience in this arena of Freemasonry. Since I've been involved in it, I have not only gotten the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge Free and Accepted Masons of Texas Amity with the Grand Lodge of Texas, but with the three mother Grand Lodges of England, Ireland, and Scotland. Also those mainstream Grand Lodges that choose to recognize Prince Hall Grand Lodges that are recognized by their counterparts. And also through the Conference of Grand Masters, I have started the recognition with approximately 14 regular Grand Lodges of Africa. I was fortunate to travel to the Republic of Congo, the Grand Lodge, on last year and sign a compact of recognition between the Grand Lodge of Congo and the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. I also worked out a resolution signed by 13 Grand Masters that was in attendance of that Grand Lodge that was presented to the Conference of Grand Masters on this last year, opening the doors for any regular Prince Hall Grand Lodge to establish fraternal recognition with those Grand Lodges of Africa. But as we all know, there's still work to be done here with our sister Prince Hall Grand Lodges that do not have mutual fraternal recognition with their counterparts. The excuse being used is the exclusive jurisdiction doctrine. Because of that, they can't receive recognition outside of the Prince Hall solidarity. I have been communicating with the Grand Chancellor Office of the United Grand Lodge of England, not only for Texas, but other Prince Hall Grand Lodges on acquiring Amity. I provide them with contact information of other Prince Hall Grand Lodges and assisted Missouri and Nevada in achieving recognition with the United Grand Lodge of England. In my attempts, I have been pushing for the Grand Lodge of England to forego the exclusive territory requirement for recognizing Prince Hall Grand Lodges, but they have not made that change yet. I continue to work on it. Now, the subject at hand, the status of amity between the two Grand Lodges in Texas and the strategy of how we got here. First, I must thank all who made mutual fraternal recognition happen on both sides. It did not happen overnight. We are reminded that it took 140 years for the two Grand Lodges in Texas to establish full recognition and to meet and greet each other as brothers. If I had to lay out a strategy for making it to happen, it would be this. There would have to be a vision, a goal, a pursuit of obtaining the goal, and in pursuing that goal, one would have to be determined, patient, and persistent. The goal was to make sure that the whole Masonic world know and recognize the Most Wishful Prince of all Grand Lodge of Texas is legitimate and regular in any other Grand Lodge by using the established standards for recognizing the regular Grand Lodges. As Brother Collins stated earlier, we use the same guidelines to determine that we are regular just like any other Grand Lodge. This will be accomplished by being recognized by the United Grand Lodge of England, the Grand Lodge of Scotland, the Grand Lodge of Ireland, and any other regular Grand Lodge, whether it is in the United States mainstream Grand Lodge or any other Grand Lodge wherever around the globe. The pursuit started with my predecessor, the Honorable Robert E. Conner, Jr., who petitioned the United Grand Lodge of England back in 1995, but it was rejected because they stated that we first had to be recognized by the Grand Lodge of Texas before they could recognize us. After which, we had several unofficial meetings with the Grand Lodge of Texas. When I became Grand Master in 2003, I started dialogue with Grand Masters starting in 2005. But after no results with 3 Grand Masters, I concluded that the authority was not in the Grand Masters but in the Board of Directors, headed by the Grand Secretary. That's when I started communicating with the Grand Secretaries. At that time, the Grand Lodge of Oklahoma and Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Oklahoma signed a compact and established mutual recognition. Sometimes after that, the Grand Lodge of Alabama, the mainstream, he caught a lot of public flack because the candidate for governor at that time was a member, and it was being publicized that he was part of a racist organization, the Masons. Knowing that attitude of the majority of the Masons of Texas, I took a different approach. I decided I would take baby steps to achieve recognition. Remember, I said it must have to be patient and persistent. Using the compact of Oklahoma Grand Lodges, I decided to request recognition without visitation. I felt that we would be declared regular and would be able to establish recognition with the United Grand Lodge of England. In April of 2007, we signed a compact declaring that the Most Wishful Prince of all Grand Lodge of Texas was regular and was recognized by the Grand Lodge of Texas. We then petitioned and received recognition from the United Grand Lodge of England. After 3 years, in 2010, I again wrote a letter to the Grand Lodge of Texas asking that we resume talk about full recognition. The letter went unanswered until 2012, when the Committee on Fraternal Recognition of the Grand Lodge of Texas contacted the United Grand Lodge of England, stating that they should withdraw fraternal recognition from the Most Wishful Prince of all Grand Lodge of Texas because we were infringing on territory of the Grand Lodge of Cote d'Ivoire, Africa, by setting up a lodge over there. When contacted by the Grand Lodge of England, I had dialogue with the Grand Lodge of Cote d'Ivoire. Eventually, we established recognition not only with the Grand Lodge of Cote d'Ivoire, but 2 other Grand Lodges in West Africa. In other words, I took lemon and made lemonade out of it. When I contacted and complained to the Grand Lodge of Texas about them writing the United Grand Lodge of England on us like we were stepchildren, things changed. Finally, on August of 2012, in my opinion, the Grand Lodge of Texas were getting heat from their counterparts. They contacted us about amending the compact to full recognition and amity. The compact was amended, voted on by our Grand Lodge in November, their Grand Lodge in December, and we signed the amended compact extending full mutual recognition on January 15, 2015 at our Grand Masonic Temple in Fort Worth, Texas. At our grand session this last June, we received the most wishful past Grand Master, Jerry Martin, in our grand communication. He is the Grand Master that amended the compact that now extends full recognition between the two Grand Lodges in Texas. We now have local lodge visitation between brothers of this jurisdiction. Our two Grand Secretaries are in constant communication with each other, and we exchange annual communication information. As I conclude, as I stated, our strategy was to, number one, have a vision. Number two, set a goal. Number three, pursue the goal with determination, patience, and persistence. Now, I'm going to take a personal privilege here, and if you want to know what drove me to become very concerned about mutual recognition, in spite of the pitfalls that I had to go through, I'm going to reference 3 books, and I'm sure you scholars are familiar with those books. And I'm one of those old Masons. I was 30 years old when I became a Mason. My dad even blackballed me one time. But when I became a Mason, there was 2 books in my local lodge. One of them was the Prince Hall Council, and I'm sure you all are familiar with this. In this book, it tells about the legitimacy of Prince Hall Masonry and the regularity of Prince Hall Masonry. And this is the exact same book that was there. And also, I pulled up the book, 1001 Questions and Answers about Freemasonry. And in it had basically the same information that the Prince Hall Council had, but it had a chapter that it called A Few Facts About Negro Lodges. And it went in and it says, why are Negro lodges not recognized, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it stated in there as the answers is that we were not legitimate and we were irregular. And in the final book that drove me to make sure that Texas Prince Hall Masonry was legitimate is the Constitution of the Grand Lodge of Texas, the old version, the one that was revised back in 1945. And it's what got me was under the section of candidates. It says, it is not permissible for a lodge to accept as initiates those having strain of Negro blood, if known. So it's been changed since then, but these were the 3 determining factors that I used to help make sure that I did all I could do to make sure that the most wishful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the state of Texas is considered legitimate and regular. Thank you.
Definitely, thank you for that presentation, Grandmaster Curtis. I think we all learned a lot from that one. And when you mentioned the Constitution of the Grand Lodge of Texas, it's actually going to be in my presentation, but this is the Grand Lodge Constitution and the Masonic Code for the Grand Lodge of Georgia from 1945 or 1954. Okay. So this is going to be in my presentation.
Okay, and I'm just going to say it has changed since then, but this was one of the determining factors that kept me going.
You know, Grandmaster Curtis, I want to say, I think that anybody listening to that, and I'm sure other Grandmasters, other jurisdictions have similar stories. When you look at the history of Freemasonry in the United States, all of these Grand Lodges, for the most part, are 100, 150, 200 years old. And I respect the fact that you kept pressing, not only as a jurisdiction, but as a man. It reminds me of a Masonic scholar who once said, he said, even though things look dark now, know that morning will surely come after the darkness. That was written by a Grand Master of Texas, and if anybody wants to read about it, they can read it in the history of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. So, shameless plug.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to go ahead and get to really the issue in the South and the history of it. Myself and Brother Collins are going to handle that portion. But first, we're going to hear the information from the great state of Alabama, and Brother Ken Collins is going to be to present that.
Good evening again, everybody. I want to make sure that again, the statements made by me are merely a reflection of my beliefs and not necessarily those of my Grand Lodge and or Grand Master. So, again, first things first. Freemasonry is supposed to be the brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God, a beautiful system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. This, it comes to a point where the sound bites get old, and and you guys have to just deal with it and deal with me, because I just get tired and frustrated with it all. Because it's after a while you get tired of it. Long story short answer. So what ends up happening is I'm a member of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. I work, and again, this is the overall gist of my presentation is taking it from a person from Alabama who's a Prince Hall Mason in Alabama. I travel all over the country with my jobs, work with dignitaries, literally not only in the United States but also abroad. I travel abroad, deal with foreign countries, so on and so forth. The problem that I have as a Prince Hall Mason in Alabama, love my Grand Lodge. I can't visit other lodges, but the question is why? And the simple answer is it's because we're not recognized by our counterpart. And when the term that people typically use is mainstream, and I've had to learn the rationale for people not liking. They don't like to hear the word mainstream in Prince Hall, as though Prince Hall is out of mainstream. There are only two mainstream Grand Lodges in the United States. That's the Grand Lodge of State as well as the Prince Hall Grand Lodge. Anything else is outside of the mainstream. So if we start that as a baseline. The second piece is when you start dealing with Prince Hall Freemasonry, the lodges that we end up interacting with, there's two major issues that you're dealing with. You're dealing with things from the Grand Lodge of State side, and then you're also dealing with things from the Prince Hall side. And there's a backdrop to it. If you live above the Mason-Dixon line, if you live in one of the northern cities, this is all crazy to you. Like, why are they doing that? But when you actually live in the South, it's a real issue. Okay? Let's look at the next slide. Let's get down here. One moment. Okay, so let's do a little backdrop of Alabama's historical history. Alabama is, again, another one of those conundrums, and it's a crazy makeup. First we're under French rule, then we're under English rule, then we're under Spanish rule, and then we're under American rule, and then we go under the Confederacy, and then we come back to the American rule. And Alabama, in and of itself, the major city being Alabama and Mobile in particular was one of the major port hubs, and it was originally the capital of the French Louisiana. So Mobile, being the major city, port city, was actually a melting pot, because you had everybody coming from the Caribbean, you had the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, as well as people coming from the Caribbean islands, bringing slaves over. You're doing a slave trade, but not only the slave trade, but you're also doing more of the commodities trading coming from Mobile. Now, what you also see is Alabama joins the Confederacy, and it serves as the first capital of the Confederacy, because it was right there in Montgomery. The old Capitol building is literally right across the street from the current State House. And then what you also see is Alabama is actually one of the last surrendering points in the civil rights. In the Civil War, right down there, right outside of Mobile. But what we start to see now is Alabama then becomes one of the strongholds for the black Reconstructionists. You have some of the most powerful black men in the country who are people, and also on the outside. And I say, there's always the talk of the founding fathers of the United States. You're talking about Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Washington, all the men of that ilk. But the black founding fathers of the South are actually mostly made up of Prince Hall Masons, because these are the men that are being elected during Reconstruction, and they're actually getting the states set back up and everything up and running again. But then when you kind of fast forward again, you start to see Alabama is actually the cornerstone of Jim Crow institutionalized racism. Alabama is the state where they actually take hold, where they're doing a lot of these night rides, where they start to see the white league, and we'll talk about that in the next couple slides. I made sure that I did a couple slides. I really want to get into more of the conversation coming in with the questions. But you start to see the institutionalized racism actually coming in the state of Alabama. The 1901 Constitution for the state of Alabama is one of the most damning institutionalized set of racism for blacks, because we're not allowed to vote. We're not allowed to participate in it. But what you also see is you actually see the Prince Hall Masons participating in the legislative process. You have past Grandmaster SSH Washington, Booker T. Washington, William Hooper Council, the president of Alabama A&M, actually a past a past junior grand warden of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. These men are the ones that are actually giving statements to the legislature on the Constitution. But then also in Alabama, it's the most visible place for domestic terrorism in the United States history. Everything that you see on television is dealing with Alabama. You see the dogs in Kelly Ingram Park. You see the George Wallace blocking the young black woman from going into integrating University of Alabama. You start to see the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson. You see the Selma March. You also see Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycotts. This all is taking place in Alabama. Not to mention Rosa Parks is a member of the Order of Eastern Star. But that's why they consider Birmingham the birthplace of the modern day civil rights movement. Now, let's look at some of the obstacles that we have in history. Sorry, I actually deleted a slide. If I could go back, one of my slides is missing. In 1876, under the Grand Lodge of Alabama, they passed the mainstream Grand Lodge, quote unquote. The mainstream Grand Lodge of Alabama passes a resolution that essentially states that black men are not able to become Freemasons. That's there, that's laid out. Let's go to another obstacle that we end up seeing inside of dealing with what we end up seeing as society, and also dealing with the Grand Lodge and Masonry. In 1876, a brother by the name of J.W. Williams, he's a member of St. Luke's Lodge number 6 out of Pensacola, Florida, under the Grand Lodge of Alabama, because Alabama actually had lodges in Florida as well at that time. It's actually one of our predecessor compact lodges, where the brother was actually killed a few hundred yards from his home by the White League. So fast forward again, 1888, Grandmaster Major Reuben R. Mims, who's the commanding officer of the Gilmore Rifles and the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Alabama, he's shot 8 times by white men after doing a visitation at Olive Branch Lodge number 1. Fast forward again, you end up seeing in the 19th century, in 1963, this is where we are now. This is coming from the proceedings of the Grand Lodge of Alabama. The Grand Chaplain and the former Grand Chaplain both asked and were permitted to address the delegates on behalf of endorsing the stand of illustrious brother George Wallace on his staunch leadership. This is the floor of a Masonic of the Grand Lodge. This actually happens on the floor of the Grand Lodge. So again, keep this as a backdrop for obstacles in history. 1964, the following resolution was adopted. This Grand Lodge go on record complimenting Governor George T. Wallace, Governor of Alabama, for the stand he has taken in leading our people back, listen to this, leading our people back to the principles upon which this country was founded and upon which it has existed down through the years. He is a leader, wonderful man, and a good Mason. This is 1964. This is during the Civil Rights Movement. This is the Grand Lodge. So just think about it. Some of the same men who are alive in our lodges today on both sides are also members of our Grand Lodge, and still voting members of our Grand Lodge today. 1965, brother Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot, and Jimmy Lee Jackson in particular is one of the most important people in the annals of American history, because it was the death of brother Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was a member of Magnolia Lodge, that sparked this Bloody Sunday March. Because immediately following his death, that's when we had the Bloody Sunday March in Alabama. Brother Gillarm's going to talk about Congressman John Lewis, who actually led that march. But that's why you have to really take this with open eyes. So again, we went from the 1860s to the 1960s, and now we're going to fast forward one more time. We're going to go to 1971. We're looking at the history of the Grand Lodge of Alabama. And again, I'm not saying anything negative about the Grand Lodge of Alabama. This is all a part of our history. And I'm going to talk, as soon as I finish this little piece, I'm going to say something that will probably be taken out of context. But if you listen to the context in which I'm stating it, you can actually identify with it. This is the Masonry in Alabama. This is taken, if we don't look at the last two sentences here, and this is actually taken out of their history. And this is basically an overview of, the section is on Negro Masonry in America. It was therefore again resolved to not admit nor recognize Negroes as Masons. The issue has remained the same for 150 years among Alabama Masons. So essentially, you're seeing in 1971, this is just a couple years before I was born, that this stance is still there. 2007, a resolution comes up on the floor of Grand Lodge of Alabama. Brother actually gives a speech, actually pretty moving speech, and about recognizing the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. So the specific concept that I wanted to lay out is that Prince Hall Freemasonry has brothers in it, and we talk about racism. And if we have, again, let's put all the pleasantries aside. If you put that stuff aside and you look at Prince Hall Freemasonry as what it is, let's stop it. Racism, I like to get away from the concept of racism in America, because I would subscribe of getting rid of that whole concept, specifically because get rid of the idea of concept of racism. It's just in our DNA. That's just who we are. Our country is a bigoted country. Because if you look at it, at the start of inception of our country, we're founded with the concept of the Indian. And then we moved to the concept of the African. And then we moved to the concept again, we move right back to you go to the African, then you go to the Irish, then you go to the Scottish, then it's back to the black. The black is always the backdrop. And then in the 1870s, during the expansion to the West, it becomes the Indian and the Chinese. And then who's the backdrop? You have the black. And then you go into the 1900s. Who do you end up seeing? It's the black. Who's the next backdrop? You end up seeing the German. Who's the next backdrop? The Mexican. The next backdrop. You end up, the black is always there. And who's the next backdrop? And again, as I'm flowing through history, you start to see who the person who's hated in time. Then you have the Italian, and then it goes to the black, and then you have the Korean, and then you have the black, and then you have the Vietnamese, and then you have the Iranian, and then you have the black, and then you have who comes next? Now we're getting back into the 2000s. It's the Russian, and now we're getting back. Who's always in the backdrop? It's the black. It's a part of the DNA of American society to always have that negative person that you're always trying to subjugate. It's in terms of Prince Hall Freemasonry, and I'm going to hop off to make sure that Brother Gillarm gets his time. We have to make sure that we look at this in the guise that Masons are supposed to accept men of good rapport. That should be it. And again, if we hop into the 2000 again, you have the black, then you have the Hispanic, and now who's the new person to look down on? Now it's the Muslim. And who's the next person to look down on? Look at the views of one Grand Lodge. The next person is the gay male. You see how these institutions will roll as far as historically, and now we're getting into a place where Masons are actually opening up their books and saying we need to follow these concepts according to the tenets that we're founded. And now we find ourselves at a place where you're saying, look, you can't stop this guy from coming in just because he's black. In terms of recognition, there's something we call the Masonic caveat, and Dave will give his. I'm a member of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alabama. I actually live in Maryland, but I travel a lot in D.C. I've actually been accepted in the Grand Lodge of D.C. because there is a caveat, making the connection between the actual Grand Lodge to Grand Lodge connection, and actually calling the Grand Master saying, I'd like to visit XYZ. It's okay. Contact their Grand Secretary. Contacted their Grand Secretary. I contacted the Grand Secretary of Alabama. I'm planning on attending a meeting with the Grand Lodge of D.C. Is that okay? I don't have a problem with it. There are informal communications taking place that people know nothing about. But again, as long as we're keeping things on the up and up and brothers feel comfortable, that's how we're going to start to tear these walls down. There's plenty of room for recognition. It's actually coming. I still believe that it's coming. There's so much more that we can do. But Dave, I'll let you go ahead and get started on your part.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Collins. And one thing that we're trying to identify between myself and Brother Collins is that in order to come up with a solution, you got to first identify the problem. So that's why we cover a lot of history between the South. Above the Mason-Dixon line, you don't experience a lot of this, but or the experience may be completely different. But down here, we have a very unique experience, and I'm gonna go ahead and jump right into my presentation. All right. To understand what is how we in the situation that we are in now, I'm gonna go backwards a little bit, and we're gonna go with the objections from the beginning in Georgia. This page is taken out of our 1875 proceedings. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia was formed in 1870.
Dave, click yourself. Click yourself so we can see your presentation.
Appreciate that, Brother Collins. All right, am I good to go now? Am I good to go now, Brother Collins?
Yeah, you look good to me.
Okay. All right, so let me start over again. Now we're going to cover the objections from the beginning in Georgia. And this page is taken out of our 1875 proceedings. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia was formed in 1870. 5 years later, the Grand Lodge tried to incorporate. They formed a committee, did the petition, and while they was attending court, there was actually objection raised by Mr. W.A. Garrard, who was the worshipful master of Ancient Landmark Lodge number 2.
We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. What we'll go ahead and do, let's go ahead and hop in on one of the questions that we saw in particular. Grandmaster Curtis, this is addressed to you. A question. David, are you muted? Did you mute yourself?
No.
We'll go ahead and hop back in again. The question, Grandmaster Curtis, is directed to you. Regarding visiting Grand Lodge of State lodges in rural areas, is it better to visit in groups to avoid incidents that can happen? In Texas, I was told by a Grand Lodge of Texas brother that I may have problems with some of the members in a lodge or two. Dave, you good now?
Grandmaster Curtis, unmute yourself. You're still muted.
I think you're muted yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, sir, we got you.
Okay. What we did to prevent there from being any situations, in order to visit another lodge of the other jurisdiction, on the first visit you have to contact your grand secretary and request a visitation. That grand secretary forward that request to the other grand secretary. He contacted the lodge, and the lodge said it's okay for that person to visit on this set meeting. That request goes back to the grand secretary and back to the person that's requesting it. So there's no surprise visits at this point when you go to visit. The lodge that you will be visiting know that you're coming, so it won't. That way we eliminate any issues as far as someone going to a lodge and not be accepted.
All right, thank you. Dave, you back in?
Yep, I believe I'm back. All right, let's try this one more time. All right, am I good to go, Ken?
Good to go.
All right. So now, done a lot of talking. So we're gonna start with the objections from the beginning in Georgia. This is actually taken out of our 1875 proceedings. The Grand Lodge was formed in 1870. 5 years later, the Grand Lodge tries to incorporate. While they're going through that process, in court, there was actual objection from a Mr. W. Garrard, who was the worship master, Ancient Landmark Lodge number 231, under the Grand Lodge of Georgia. His claim was that the Grand Lodge of Georgia had exclusive right in the state. Now, as of yesterday, I went actually checked under the Grand Lodge of Georgia's list of lodges, and that Ancient Landmark Lodge is still an active lodge under the Grand Lodge. So we were just trying to incorporate, not asking for recognition, not doing anything directly to the Grand Lodge of Georgia. We were just trying to protect our own assets, and there was objections for us to even do that. And this petition was denied. The Grand Lodge was not able to incorporate until 1890. So fast forward to 1922. The Grand Master at the time was Dr. Henry Rutherford Butler of Atlanta. And in his 1922 address, he talks about everything that happened in the Grand Lodge. And prior to this page, he states various members of the Grand Lodge and how they died. One thing that's mentioned is that year we had 12 members that were shot. Now he states that one of them was shot accidentally, but we still had 12 members that died from being shot. And he also identifies another person who was actually murdered. So we had a lot of things that were going on in our Grand Lodge at this time. And when he gets to his section called Casualties, he talks about Western Light Lodge number 67. Now prior to this, he mentioned a couple of other lodges that were being burned down. And as you can see here, it came from a Brother Bacon of Western Light Lodge. He says, "Dear Grand Master, on our last meeting night, someone shot into the hall, killing one of our brothers, and another died." Now, Butler says that the secretary didn't give any particulars, so he just assumed that the other person died from a heart attack from being scared to death. So Dr. Butler reaches out to the governor of Georgia at the time, Thomas Hardwick, and asks him to basically do something. So we have our members being killed. This is not being advertised in newspapers. The public is not being made aware of this. Can you do something to help us? Needless to say, there was no help. So Dr. Butler had to tell these lodges to continue to go to meetings, knowing that they could possibly be killed. Now, as of right now, I have not been able to find where Governor Hardwick was actually a member of the Grand Lodge of Georgia, but what I did find is that he was the guest speaker at quite a few of their events. So now we're going to fast forward to 1954. This is actually out of the Masonic Manual and Code for the Grand Lodge of Georgia, where it says item number 308, the African or Negro Masonry in the United States is irregular and clandestine. So now, to recap a little bit, we start from 1875. They weren't even trying to do anything with the Grand Lodge of Georgia. They was trying to incorporate, and they were rejected then. Now you have our members in 1922 being killed, lodges being burned down. and I was talking to my good friend, the Assistant District Deputy Grand Master Reggie Walker out of Mansfield, number 295, and he stated his lodge had to meet at midnight because there was no other time that was safe in the county for black men to meet. So we have our members being pushed aside. They're being told they're irregular and clandestine. They knew that their lineage traced to the Grand Lodge of England just as exact same as the Grand Lodge of Georgia, but they weren't excluded in anything. And now we have Congressman John Lewis. His brother Ken stated, if you're familiar with what happened in Selma, you recognize this bridge. And we have on the left Congressman and brother John Lewis leading the marches across the bridge. Now, while John Lewis, at the time that this happened, he's not a Prince Hall Mason, but he is a member of the Grand Lodge now. But while this was happening to him, and PTSD is very real, John Lewis is getting beat. These other marchers were getting beat. While you still had the same members down in Selma, and you had other civil rights leaders, James Orange, Ralph Abernathy, Andrew Young, all Prince Hall Masons, all this stuff happened to him, especially John Lewis, and the governor of Georgia at the time, George Wallace, was a member of the Grand Lodge of Alabama. So this mindset starts to trickle down. People do not want to be you're not going to want to be around your quote-unquote white counterpart. You're not going to trust white people, period, because you've seen what happened to your grandfather. Told you a story about what happened to him while he was trying to attend lodge meeting. You heard the stories about our lodge meetings being burnt, a lot of lodges being burned and being killed, and our members being killed. So you're not going to want to. So you're going to even without experiencing that situation, you're going to be kind of want to step back. You're not going to want to be included. Now, us black people, we've always been willing to allow whites or any other race to be with us. Our very first lodge in Georgia in 1866 was integrated. But you're not going to feel comfortable going into their house, because you go into their house, now you expect something to happen to you. So when we talk about why this recognition and amity wasn't happening in the South, they were looking at everything that happened to basically the black people anyway. But us as the people, we were always forgiving, always trying to look forward. And that happened in Georgia under past Grandmaster Willie Williams. And around 2001, 2002, past Grandmaster Williams starts reaching out to some of the mainstream Grand Lodges. And he writes a letter requesting recognition not only to the Grand Lodge of Georgia, but almost every other mainstream Grand Lodge, to include the United Grand Lodge of England. And of course, none of this stuff happened. But he was trying to establish recognition. He was meeting with the Grand Lodge of Georgia. Same thing with past Grandmaster X.A. O'Neill in the 60s and 70s. He was trying to establish recognition with them. So when we look at why recognition wasn't happening in the South, you got to actually look at black history and see what was actually happening to the black man in the South, and then you'll probably get your answer. So next, we're going to go ahead and look at taking some questions.
Hey, Dave. I wanted to make sure that we made a clear statement that the concept of non-acceptance is not just on the Grand Lodge of State side. It's actually on both sides. So I can say emphatically, I've talked to members of Prince Hall Grand Lodges throughout the South who did not want recognition with their Grand Lodge counterparts. Some are more vocal about it, and some are more behind the scenes about it. But equally, I've talked to Grand Lodge of State elected officers who don't want it, but some of them also do. But again, the disclaimer has to be said. It's not just one-sided. It's actually coming from both sides, and that's where sometimes both sides have to put their guard down. But in terms of the younger Grand Lodge, when we talk about that PTSD, you remember I used the term. Some members of the Grand Lodge of Alabama watched people be hung. They saw houses blew up, and the same men that were wearing white aprons were also wearing white sheets.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to keep that context in there when you talk about a Southern Grand Lodge like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, and even in Texas, because there are lynchings going on of our members all across the country, and
Absolutely.
that
I want
PTSD hits everybody.
I wanted to piggyback off of what you were just saying, Ken. Even though I'm a member of a lodge here in Ohio, my home is Jackson, Mississippi. That's where all of my family is, in Mississippi. And I used to be a member under the M.W. Stringer Grand Lodge of Mississippi, Prince Hall affiliation, for a few years. And Ken, you took the words right out of my mouth, because I was going to say we can't just sit here and point the finger completely at them, because the reluctance is on both sides of the coin. I have seen members of the M.W. Stringer Grand Lodge make statements such as, "Why should we ask the white man for acceptance?" You know, I have seen racism on both sides of the coin in Mississippi. So in order for this to be a true discussion, we can't just sit and point the finger without recognizing what goes on our side of the coin as well.
If I can respond to that too, I think that both sides, there's issues on both sides. The biggest problem I feel on this issue is that black men in America, to me, and I may be biased because I'm a black man, I think that our story, our feelings, our emotions, or what have you, are really some of the most neglected in American history. I'm sure sisters might want to debate on that, but I'm just saying, I really do believe that though. And so with that being said, my great-grandfather is a Prince Hall Mason. He's 97 years old. Okay, so and all four of his grandparents had been enslaved. Okay, so this history that we're talking about is very, very real and very personal for a lot of people, and for I would argue the majority of Prince Hall Masons. The thing that I think that people have to keep in mind is that when you go to these small towns, particularly in the South, I'm not a Southerner myself, but the Prince Hall Lodge and the historically Caucasian Lodge down the street, you're going to find some kind of history. Yes, you're going to find some of these people are related. And if they can't even talk about their family relationships historically, going back to the times of the slave trade, the Masonic element it all becomes merged into this one big melting pot. And until I think our generation that's alive today, we have to be able to sit down in a mature manner, regardless of your skin color, and be able to have that conversation as men and as Masons. And some conversations have to be had before you even go into a lodge. That's really what I think about that. So yeah.
Now, I also want to add, moving from a state where there was no recognition to a state where there is full recognition and visitation, I will say that the brothers under the Grand Lodge of Ohio, the lodges that I have visited since I've been here, have been nothing short of welcoming to me, myself. Every lodge that I have visited, I was treated as a brother. I was invited to come back whenever I wanted to. I was invited to be a part of things that generally only their members would be a part of, dealing with their lodge. So I just want to say, it's not all bad, and we're not all watching our backs when we go to visit lodges in certain places under the Grand Lodge estate, because that hasn't been my experience here in Ohio at all.
No, absolutely not. I think, the issue I think that a lot of people might not realize is that when you look at cultures and ethnic groups, the cultures and ethnic groups always have a cultural home, a cultural center. I like how you mentioned with Jacksonville, Mississippi. I always talk about my maternal roots being in Alabama, even though I'm from New Jersey originally. The best statistics that I've ever seen indicate that roughly 50% of all Prince Hall Masons live in the Deep South, in the southeastern region, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi. Okay, so with that being said, that is for the African American, that's our cultural center, that's our cultural home. And I think that when you tie that into the dedication that any group of people, regardless of race, feel for Freemasonry, for their cultural institutions, and then you tie in this element of all these racial politics that were once in the letter of the law. You look at if anybody want to go check the film Rosewood out, you'll actually see they had certain events in the film happening in the Masonic Lodge that were happening in that town. That's based on real events and real history of these the riot of the borderline genocide that happened there. So it's all merged together. We have to be able to have the conversation at some point.
We just got a quick question. There was a question that came in from brother Oscar Allen, but I also want to make a clear lineup that there are those who have that subscribe to the idea that Prince Hall Freemasonry, there shouldn't be a Prince Hall Freemasonry, that it just came out of a bubble. There is a rationale for Prince Hall Freemasonry. St. John's Lodge, they couldn't get into St. John's Lodge. They end up coming in through the Irish Lodge, but then they were supposed to be coming in through Lodge St. Andrews, but Brother Warren ends up getting killed, and then, but what a lot of people try to overlook is the fact that Peter Mantor is one of the best narratives in terms of why African Lodge moves forward through history, and it's expanded, throughout not only the Northeast but also through the West and then through the rest of the country. You have to keep in an open context that they did the best that they could do at the time. There are those, even in some articles, that state that there were African American members in Lodge St. Andrews. The problem is, over the course of the years that was published, not one name has been produced of that person, those supposed 7 people of color during the time that African Lodge was actually working. And remember, in some of the lodges, in particular in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, that freed blacks were not allowed to stay within the state. They were required after, in some states, is a minimum of 1 year. In some states, up to 2 years, you were required to leave the state. So how could you logically be a member of a lodge when you couldn't be a free person for a specific amount of time? But to get back to Oscar Allen's question, he states Gillarm gave the example of Georgia as a reason why Amity was not seen as successful. As each Grand Lodge is independent, one, what other Prince Hall Grand Lodge attempted to establish Amity in a forgiving extension to the Grand Lodges, and dates and when? One answer I can give you is the Grand Lodge of Arkansas. The Grand Lodge of Arkansas gave blanket recognition to any regular Grand Lodge, and that was done, was it 2 years ago, Dave? I want to say 2013.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Somewhere about the time frame.
2013.
Make sure you clarify that it's the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Arkansas that you're speaking of.
Yeah, exactly. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Arkansas passed a resolution stating that any regular Grand Lodge recognized by the Prince Hall Grand Lodge that's under the U.S. Conference of Grand Master, they recognize. So that's already been done and completed. So that's one example to answer that question. Another question was, are the others who didn't, or the ones who aren't now, is that based solely on the experience rooted in the past? Grandmaster Curtis, can you hop on that one?
Okay, what is that asking specifically?
Basically, are the Grand Lodges that didn't are the Grand Lodges that have not sought recognition just merely not asking for recognition because they're holding on to the past on the Prince Hall side?
No, what I've found out is, after you've been beat over the head, so many times, you get tired of it. And so I think a lot of them, they've just given up due to the fact, I'm not saying all of them, but some of them have given up due to the fact that, it's not going to happen. You cannot legislate brotherly love. Okay. Now, and another way of looking at it is that you can take a young lady to the dance, but you can't make her dance with you. And so a lot of that has happened. And so some of them take on the opinion, well, I don't need them to justify me being regular. I'll just accept it and move forward.
Grandmaster Curtis, that reminds me, even though he wasn't a Mason, it reminds me of something that Malcolm X once said. which was that he said the so-called Negro in America cannot be blamed for his racial animosity because he's only responding to the racial animosity that has greeted him ever since he arrived on these shores. So I think that goes, right in line with what you're saying. I mean, the institutional memory of Prince Hall Freemasonry and even the more recent history in the 1900s has shown us how some people, not all, and again, it's not all brothers of European descent or European American descent. I mean, I'm an honorary member of a historically white lodge myself. So it's not everybody, it's not every state, it's not every every county, but the historical institutional memory is there.
I wanted to add in on the back of what Kim was saying about the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Arkansas. We also must note that the Grand Lodge of New Mexico has passed a resolution to recognize all Prince Hall affiliated Grand Lodges, period. So it's almost like they did the exact opposite of what the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Arkansas did.
Just another to add to that. Also, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alaska actually did the same thing of recognizing across the board the regular Grand Lodges and blanket recognition of regular Grand Lodges. But something else I think we have to realize is that there are African American, there are black. Let me just use that as an overarching term. There are black Masons in the Grand Lodges of State. There are Caucasian, Hispanic, the whole gamut in Prince Hall Freemasonry. Even within that context, there are brothers that will be bigots towards them, and that goes back to that DNA that was part of us just being Americans. There are people that have those knee-jerk reaction towards those people. So that's already there. But someone brought up to me that the Grand Lodge, the Grand Lodges of State, they accept black men, and this is something I think we also need to look. You can kind of dissect that. The Grand Lodges of State, and I'd be willing to kind of do to work with some of the black members on the Grand Lodge of State side to do a litmus test. And in terms of Freemasonry in the United States, black men are accepted. In terms of Freemasonry across the globe, Grand Lodges of State accept men of African and the Caribbean background before they will accept, or with greater acceptance than those of African American background. So, and again, what you end up hearing in dialogue is that we have there's a black Grand Master and blah 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 blah. There's a black Grand Lodge officers, but let's dissect those numbers of black members, and then you separate them into three categories. You have African American, you have of African descent, and you have islanders. So when you start looking at actual African Americans who have served, those numbers start to dwindle down vastly. So again, those type of conversations you start to see, if you're being forthright, is there's a minuscule amount of African Americans. One brother actually communicated with today about this particular situation to get us to try to break down these barriers. But you got to have a full conversation and not try to nitpick what you're actually talking about.
And also to add on to that, Ken, I have seen numerous instances in my research where different state Grand Lodges actually had the verbiage in their code and constitution restricting their membership based on skin color. I have never seen that from a Prince Hall Grand Lodge. I just wanted to add that.
The way I say it is that, because we still had a stigma that Prince Hall is masonry for African Americans, but I put it like this: Prince Hall Freemasonry is Freemasonry for men of all colors, all colors, and so that we don't exclude anyone.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I answer this. Oscar Allen wrote a note. Ken, there is evidence of black men who were Masons in North Carolina that were not PHA lodges. If we're going to actually touch on that actual issue, the individuals that were initiated, passed, and raised in that particular lodge were, I want to get into the again the categories were considered quadroons. And if you want to get into actually that conversation, when they found out that they were of black blood, they were kicked out of the organization. Similar thing happens in Maryland. James, I'll let you finish that conversation up because we had this at the House of the Temple with Brother Brent Morris. I'll let you finish that one up.
Oh boy. Well, long story short, I mean, see, here's the thing that has to be understood on this note, because you do, and you can almost do almost an episode on this topic in and of itself. You do have exceptions to every rule, and you have gray areas. Everything's not always necessarily black and white, quote unquote. The Grand Lodge of Maryland, AF and AM, in their official proceedings, actually, I believe it was in the year 1823, if I'm not mistaken, they actually had an issue that came up where their lodges were in the city of Baltimore, at least one or two of them, was actually corresponding with and allowing visitation with Black Masons. Now, we don't know at this time who those brothers were, who they were visiting with, and who they were dealing with, because at that time there was no known Prince Hall lodges, at least as far as I know, in the city of Baltimore. This is before Friendship Lodge Number 1, which came into existence, I believe, in 1825, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody's going to correct me if I got that date wrong. But with that being said, you see that there's always friends of, regardless of what color that they are, and you see exceptions to every rule. I mean, like we said earlier, you have men of African descent in historically all Caucasian Grand Lodges, but again, that's the exception, not the rule. You know, you can go to somewhere, whether it's in North Carolina, you can go show Maryland, you can show certain other places when you go back in time. Obviously, the big example would be Alpha Lodge 116 in my home state, actually in East Orange, which is really basically my hometown just about. You know, you can show those examples, but again, that's the exception, not the rule for the majority of folks' experience. So I think that there's both points are valid and should be given light, for sure. So yeah, we're going to take another question?
Yes, we're gonna have another question. One thing also I want to note is, as Brother Collins stated earlier, it's usually custom of the younger Grand Lodge to ask the elder Grand Lodge for recognition. Well, there was, as he mentioned, the Grand Lodge of New Mexico that extended recognition to all Prince Hall Grand Lodges, and not all Prince Hall Grand Lodges have reciprocated. Mm-hmm. You also have the Grand Lodge of New York that requested recognition from every Prince Hall Grand Lodge that's in amity with their state counterpart. And not all Prince Hall Grand Lodges have responded to their letters. So in some cases, if I remember correctly, they actually sent the letters out a couple times, and it still hasn't been responded to. But to take another question, it says, for some, that heritage means honoring the old traditions and customs. Is this push truly about mutual fellowshipping among Freemasons, or punctuating the new historical turning point in the chronology of Freemasonry in America? Anybody want to take that one?
Say that again one time for me, Dave.
Is this push truly about mutual fellowshipping among Freemasons, or punctuating a new historical turning point in the chronology of Freemasonry in America?
I would say that it's really about fellowshipping as Freemasons. I mean, as it was stated before, Freemasonry is supposed to be the brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God. I haven't seen anywhere where God said that my brothers are only black, or that a white man's brothers are only white. You know what I'm saying? It should be about fellowshipping as Freemasons, regardless of what the color of our skin is. I mean, we're supposed to be we're supposed to be free thinkers. We're supposed to be some of the leaders in intellectual thought in this world, but there's still the issue of race that divides us in certain areas, and that doesn't coincide with what I was taught. That's just my personal opinion on that.
Grandmaster Curtis, we had a question, and it's actually written out to Brother Collins, but I want you to hop in on this. It is written. It is sometimes practiced prejudice to exclude non-African American Masons from Prince Hall lodges, or rather usher them to lodges that are more accepting. As a Grandmaster, what do you do when you, for instance, you're Grandmaster and you find out that there's an Hispanic brother that wants to become a Mason? And under the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas, or it's a white brother that wants to become a Mason under Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. What stance would you take if you find out that the lodges are purposely directing them to go to the Grand Lodge of State? What's your perspective on that?
First of all, I would not allow it, but because we have in Texas, we've got a melting pot of military. We got Fort Hood, Fort Bliss, and all of those military installations, and we have brothers of all colors, all ethnicity that's petitioning the lodge, and we have not had any issues. I know I've had one of my worship masters was Puerto Rican. Love him. One of them Hispanic. I mean, we don't discriminate, and we will not allow that in Texas.
Okay. And I actually wanted to answer that in particular. Brother Bots actually posed that question. I became a member of a clandestine lodge because I knew about Black Masons. I just thought it was all under the same guise, that there just happened to be one Grand Lodge, but some lodges were all white and some lodges were all black. I moved to Birmingham, and I look in the phone book, Grand Lodge of Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I call, and the gentleman that asked me told me, you need to join the Prince Hall Grand Lodge.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I know of Black Masons. I know the term Prince Hall. I'm thinking it's all one. It's all the same. The first gentleman I run into is wearing a big old giant square and compass, and I got my butt beat. I joined the lodge, and there is clandestine as clandestine can be. So that actually goes across the board, where on both ends, where you're directed to go to XYZ Lodge.
Mm-hmm.
They actually talk about, people were asking, well, are there Black members in the Grand Lodge of Alabama? From my understanding, there are only two. And then there are other people of color of Asian descent, i.e. Indian. One came from Louisiana. The other one was raised, the Black member came from Louisiana, admitted in, and then there was he brought in another member. In terms of the Indian brother, was made in another state, but actually came in. So again, that's where you have to keep all this in context. I think as 1930s, we actually had one of our Grand District deputies was actually a Caucasian male in the heart of the Black Belt. And again, it's across the board. Whereas we've always been accepting and forgiving. Sometimes, the question is, are we living in the past? It's hard to get out of the future, go to the future, if you can't get out of where you are, because you're still seeing it every single day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I'll put it like this: it's affecting the other Grand Lodges more so than it is us, because nowadays you have young men that are growing up, they're going to college together, and then when they get out of college, they want to join, the Caucasian young men want to join their Grand Lodge, and then they want to bring their Black friend in, and so they run into issues. Well, you can come, but I think he needs to join another lodge. So that has happened in the past, and I see it correcting itself as the new generation come in to Masonry.
Absolutely.
I wanted to say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think we got time for I guess one more question. Did Prince Hall cite exclusive territorial jurisdiction in quotation marks, says for black people when it declared itself independent and sovereign. Did this cause a schism with the mainstream lodges for this mere fact that we decided to do our own thing?
Wait, say it one more time.
Right.
All right. Did Prince Hall cite exclusive territorial jurisdiction in quotation marks for black people when it declared itself independent and sovereign? Did this cause a schism with the mainstream lodges for this mere fact that we decided to do our own thing?
Okay, can I take that?
Absolutely.
All right. I don't think you'll ever find anywhere documented per se that any Prince Hall Grand Lodge ever outrightly claimed exclusive territorial jurisdiction over men of African descent. I could be wrong. However, I will say that I think that when Prince Hall, what was becoming the Prince Hall affiliation, I would say, started to become independent of the Grand Lodge of England and all that stuff from an administrative perspective, I think it was kind of more so understood. It might have been implied. I don't know if you're going to find that written anywhere. You might. But I think it was more so understood because, again, at the end of the day, whether it was written in your state or not, the understanding was separate institutions. You had the black church, you had your black grocer, you had your black everything, going back from 1700s, 1800s, all the way through the 1900s, okay? So I think that it was more understood to be that way regardless. Because, again, I mean, you have people, even now, I do believe you have people of varying ethnicity that if a white young man comes to and I'll give you an example. Matter of fact, when I joined my lodge in 2010, one of my classmates was the first Caucasian that we ever had in Corinthian 18, Brother Dave Linkus, who's also a doctor. He's a neurosurgeon, okay, a professor of neuroscience. And when I joined, we were getting ready to get our first degree, and one of my classmates at the time, who by the way didn't get raised, made a statement. He said, "Man, I thought I was joining the Black Masons. Why is this white guy here with us?" And at that point, I actually said, "Hey, what does it matter? We all paid our money. We all here together. Let's just go in and do whatever it is we're about to do and move on." Okay? It didn't make a difference. The reason why I did that was because knowing the little bit of history I knew at the time, I said, look, he might not have meant anything by it in his mind, but what effect does that have on that individual to feel that way, to be told, well, just because you're white, you need to go over here? You wouldn't like that if it was in reverse. So why, I think that, again, might not necessarily be racism in terms of hatred, but it's the racism that's intrinsic to the United States culture that hopefully we can elevate past as we move forward. And as Grandmaster Curtis said, I think the wisdom of future generations will correct itself in the course of history.
In that previous question, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Grant.
I was going to say to clarify what he was asking. If you're saying that there are 4 men that want to denounce their membership in Prince Hall Masonry and go elsewhere, they can do that. That's up to them at their own will and accord. But the one thing to keep in mind is if you go, you leave the Prince Hall property where it is. You don't take that with you. And if that's kind of the underlying question, and that I kind of feel that's what it is. But anyway, that's it.
And another thing too, Dave, and just to be clear, Prince Hall did claim exclusive territorial jurisdiction over Scottish Rite Masonry in America, because the active, and again, this is going to a previous episode, the active Supreme Councils in the U.S., and, again, let's go ahead and set this out. The active Supreme Councils in the U.S. came together to create two, which made them, and under the court, Article 8, and it said it clearly, there shall be only 2 Supreme Councils for all what they considered colored masonry in the United States. No more, no less. And the states were defined, and they were redefined in the early 1900s as well. So we can get off that one.
All right, got another question. And since it's amazing how things work out, I think Ken, me and you are always on the same page. This question just came in. Is it considered contradictory that the mainstream United Supreme Council recognizes the Prince Hall United Supreme Council Southern jurisdiction, when the said members of the mainstream United Supreme Council belong to some of the very Grand Lodges that don't recognize Prince Hall Grand Lodges within the South.
Can I take that one?
Absolutely.
I would say yes and no to that, because Scottish Rite Masonry is Scottish Rite Masonry. Craft Masonry is craft masonry. Yes, you have to be a craft mason or a master mason in order to join a Scottish Rite body, but they are both governed by two different organizations. So to that end, I would say no. However, the fact that the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite on the mainstream side and the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite on the Prince Hall side both have full recognition with each other, and the only states where the Grand Lodges in those states do not have full recognition with each other are also in the South, that maybe that could be the push that they need to try to push it towards where we could all be on one accord. A wise man once said, and I've heard it said on numerous occasions, that before we have full recognition across the board, there's going to have to be a lot of feelings on both sides. And I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I would also say, too, I'm not sure who asked the question, but I would also say, I don't really worry about how a thing works most of the time. I worry that I'm just care about that it works. And with the Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction being headquartered here in D.C., I've met their Grand Commander Ron Seal several times. I consider him a good brother, a good friend. I'm not going to overanalyze why somebody did the right thing. Why in the Scottish Rite side. I'm not going to do that. I don't know who asked that question. I don't mean to disregard it, but I'm not going to overanalyze why somebody did the right thing. The fact is, it was done, and hopefully in the future, I think that can help be a bridge, on the Grand Lodge level. That's just my opinion.
And I was gonna say specifically, the perfect conversation about this is when it was passed, when Sovereign Grand Commander Seal was at the Supreme Council. Grandmaster Curtis was there as well. They talked about it. We're going to have it, have recognition, and the Grandmasters from Alabama, on the mainstream side, Alabama, all the southern Grandmasters that were present was told by Grandmaster Seal, and when the vote came, from what we were instructed, it passed unanimously with no moans or grumbles. In particular, about this particular conversation, which is really important to me, is I actually I called the Sovereign Grand Commander, and I said, I'm planning on going to the reunion in D.C. Is that okay? Sure. I called the deputy of the Orient here in D.C., who happens to be Caucasian, in Washington, D.C. for the Prince Hall Supreme Council. Called him, let him know I was coming, and the head of the Knights of St. Andrew is an African American male, Brother Marlon Curtis, who greeted me. I presented my patent as a Sovereign Grand Inspector General, and he brought me in, and that was it. There was no more ifs, ands, or buts. Now, if I was in Alabama, that would have been a totally different reception. But like you say, those types of interactions, the Sovereign Grand Commanders and the Supreme Councils can pass whatever legislation that they want, but they've left it based on the Grand Lodge, because you're also governed by your Grand Lodge in those particular instances.
And I personally think it does cause a unique situation. Just like come October, we could very well be sitting in the same United Supreme Council session with Sovereign Grand Commander Seal. But that same Sovereign Grand Commander couldn't visit my lodge in Georgia, and I couldn't visit his. So it does present a very unique situation. It does seem contradictory, but as Brother Morgan stated, maybe it's a bridge to something else. All right. Do we have any other questions that we need to take?
And just for clarification, that there are, again, and it's said clearly there are men on both sides, both Prince Hall and Grand Lodge of State, who are turned away for the color of their skin, to include their religion, and that's just the reality of it. Bigots are everywhere, even within a lodge. So to say otherwise is a lie.
Mhm. I have a question
Yeah.
for actually for Grandmaster Curtis. Uh, with you knowing this history, and I'm not sure what, because I know you said you were made a Mason at I think you said 30 years old, which that can only have been about 2 or 3 years ago. But
Yeah, right.
with that being said, with you knowing the history of your state, of Texas, with all the things that have happened, violence, bad things said, hurt feelings on both sides, or whatever the case may be. What is your, if you had a crystal ball, what do you see happening within the state of Texas? Not to give away any plans of anything coming up, but what are some things that you would like to see, in terms of maybe joint projects, or what do you think that the young Mason in your state can look forward to seeing now that you all are fully in harmony with one another down there?
Mhm. I see as the new generations take charge that there will be a lot of the and what we stated at this point is we do not try to dictate what Masons do outside of town meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever they want to do outside of town meetings together is totally up to them.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing to keep in mind is that you know you you should not be going to a lodge or any other place where you don't know who the members are. I mean, if you're going to visit a lodge, it should be because someone has invited you, someone that you know is at that lodge. You just don't show up at somebody's lodge hall and say, I want to go. And that doesn't just necessarily mean outside of Prince Hall Masonry. I mean, you should not even be going to a Prince Hall lodge without them knowing that you're coming. I know we've kind of taken it for granted, but since we are going to be regular or be recognized internationally, we have to make sure that we follow those same guidelines. In other words, if I'm gonna attend the if I'm a member, if I'm attend a Grand Lodge, attend a local lodge in Louisiana, I should have my Grandmaster contact their Grandmaster, see if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing should apply within the state of Texas. If I'm going to attend a lodge of the Grand Lodge of Texas, they need to know about it because it's ultimately up to the worship master and the members to determine whether you can visit or not.
Mm-hmm.
If 3 members of a lodge say you can't visit, it's up to the master to tell that visitor, I'm sorry, you can't attend.
Mm-hmm.
So you should not go in any place that you're not invited. And I hope I'm not getting off of your question, but as far as laying cornerstones and dedications and things of that nature, being in parades, whatever, that's totally up to the lodge themselves.
Grandmaster Curtis, I had one more a question in particular for you. For your sister Grand Lodges throughout the South, um, and this is an issue that we all face. They say, well, we know that, again, I'm throwing out an anecdotal number.
Right. Mm-hmm.
About 65% of the brothers in the Grand Lodge typically don't travel outside of their state.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the 30% that do and actually visit lodges, those of us who go overseas and we want to participate in, visiting lodges overseas. You might be in a place, I might be in France, and I want to go to a lodge there.
Mm-hmm.
How would you recommend us even talking to the grandmasters, or even broaching the subject with Grand Lodge officers and brothers about getting amity, even if a lot of the brothers are not going to end up traveling, but rather than say, "Oh, I don't go, you shouldn't go," versus opening the door towards the true Masonic mantra of being able to go somewhere and visit a lodge?
I think that again, has to be addressed through you contact a member contacting his Grand Lodge, and they contact the other Grand Lodge and get their permission, because that's what England does. You just can't show up at the Grand Lodge of England, I don't care who you are, without you getting permission from your Grand Lodge to their Grand Lodge to their Grand Secretary saying it's okay for your member to visit. And one example is that the Grand Lodge of England has districts, say, like in the Philippines, and we have a lot of our Masons that are soldiers that they go to the Philippines, and then it's nothing for us to get a call from the Grand Lodge of England saying one of your brothers came and he tried to attend our lodge. That communication is going on behind the scenes all the time. So we just have to inform the brothers, if you plan on going anywhere outside of your jurisdiction and you want to attend a lodge, you need to clear it through your Grand Secretary first.
All right. All right, we got one other question, and it's also directed to Grandmaster Curtis. Do you think anything should be done to educate Prince Hall brothers who think that a shared sense of blackness should trump mutual recognition among lawful Masons? I have spoken to several Prince Hall brothers who sympathize with clandestine orders, such as supposedly predominantly black four-letter International Free and Accepted Modern Masons, Modern Free, PHO, etc. Mm-hmm. Grand Lodges, but display apathy towards our Grand Lodge estate brethren.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need to be trained, well informed on that, because that actually throws a kink in the works as far as our counterparts in our own states, because that was one of the issues that we had when we talked with the grand officers of the Grand Lodge of Texas. Well, we know it's a man of color that's a Mason, but we don't know if it's a Prince Hall or if it's one of those other Masons. So that's the reason why we had to make sure. What we did was we're trying to make sure we take every precaution. We showed them, okay, this is our dues card. Now, if they come to you, they're supposed to have a dues card before you let them come to your lodge. And the same thing, that's the only way you're going to be able to handle that. So I hope that answers your question.
Dave, let me throw one more quick question in for Grandmaster Curtis. There's another question. It has been an ongoing conversation that when the Grandmaster pulls recognition from one jurisdiction, all houses, York and Scottish Rite, must do the same. Is this true, and why?
Because it's true, because all members of that jurisdiction are beholden to the Grand Lodge of that state. In other words, you're a Master Mason of that state. So when recognition is pulled as a Grand Lodge, it does include the upper houses as well.
If I can jump in real quickly, since we're talking about opinion bodies, I was corrected, or reminded, I really should say, by a couple brothers online when we go back to asking about exclusive jurisdiction over men of color of Prince Hall Grand Lodges claiming that. I was reminded this was in the Grand Lodge, but at least in in Article 7 of the formation of the United Supreme Council in 1881, you do find that the ancient accepted Scottish Rite did actually write the jurisdiction and control of the degrees of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite among colored men in the United States, et cetera, basically claiming jurisdiction over men of color, men of African descent. So I want to correct myself, and put positive information out there, and thank our viewers for making sure we're putting out the correct and complete information. So I want to thank you guys.
Dave, just real quick, I know you're about to get me. In terms of ETJ, exclusive territorial jurisdiction, it's always a caveat in it, because there's in different areas, again, you have to be able to put the right argument in the right place. There's in the state of Alaska, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alaska was established before the mainstream Grand Lodge of Alaska. So who is the younger Grand Lodge? And who had to ask for recognition? Who was invading whose territory in those type of situations? And in terms of what the Grand Lodge of, for instance, what was what would have been the question had recognition been posed to the Grand Lodge of England when the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Alaska requested recognition? Did they have to have recognition with the mainstream Grand Lodge in Alaska first? Because we're the senior Grand Lodge. We would have been the senior Grand Lodge in that particular instance. So you gotta kind of weigh that. The exclusive territorial jurisdiction is one thing, but you also have to look at, in terms of Prince Hall Freemasonry, why Prince Hall Freemasonry is even around, and it's needed, and it has to survive. There's a rationale behind it. It's just not we're just trying to invade someone's territory. We were not able to become members. And don't confuse the token membership. They're saying that we have a couple members with the reality of the full population. Because if it put it like this, 13% of your membership should reflect the 13% of the U.S. population, if that's the case. Anyway, thanks, Steve.
Like, this is definitely, as you can see, definitely a hot topic. This is probably one of our most requested topics. But for the viewers that we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, we will be answering them on the Think Tank page or on the event page or wherever you posted them. So we're going to go ahead and begin to start wrapping it up, and we're going to start getting our parting comments from Most Worshipful Grand Master Wilbur Curtis.
Okay, thank you, Brother Gillard, and fellow members. It's been indeed a pleasure for me to be on here, and hopefully I've shed some light on the fraternal recognition and legitimacy and regularity. And it should not just be based upon the SAL, but we know we have to work through that. And like I said, I hope it's something that I have done that helps shed some of the light on that. And I want to thank you all for allowing me to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Grandmaster, for actually accepting the invitation. And now we're going to go with Worship Master Preston Collins.
Well, once again, I want to say thank you to you guys for having me on the show. As always, it's a pleasure. I enjoy picking your brains and having my brains picked by you guys. Grandmaster Curtis, it's a pleasure to meet you, sir.
Same here.
God bless you all. Thanks for having me in my Russell Simmons voice. God bless you all. Thank you for coming out. Good night.
All right, Brother Morgan.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank Brother Collins for coming on with us one more time, and of course, I want to thank Grandmaster Curtis. He's a Grandmaster who I'm sure that knows in your vocabulary somewhere, but I haven't yet to hear it from you. You every time I turn around, you're doing something for somebody else. I'm wondering, when is this brother home? And I see even when you're home, you're working with young brothers who are hungry for knowledge. So I want to thank you for that. Also want to plug once again the history of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. It's entitled Prince Hall Freemasonry in the Lone Star State, from CUNY to Curtis. So if you don't have this, you need to get this by Brother Robert Ouzel. It's a great book. The last chapter is on Grandmaster Curtis, so you can learn a little bit more about him and his Masonic career. Other than that, I'll see everybody next month. Thank you for being online with us tonight.
Okay, Brother Gillard, can I plug a book also?
Absolutely, sir.
The Conference Grandmaster's history book. If you can, this is not any hearsay. This is actually proceedings of our various conferences from the beginning to 2013. So if you can go online and order this book, it's pretty thick, but it is detailed and it has specifics and it's true data about Prince Hall Masonry. Thank you.
We will post the information for how you can get both of these books on the event page. So if you don't have them, you'll find it there. I will make sure personally that it can get posted.
Thank you.
All right, Brother Collins.
Well,
next month, everybody else needs to get some theme music. We can't let Ken beat us like this.
We want to make sure that No, seriously. I always have fun with the guys. We want to thank everybody for tuning in this time. We had fun, and again, it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's not always a pleasant conversation, and it goes back and forth. And I think that as long as we can continuing the conversation, a dialogue is always something good. It's when you're being quiet that something bad happens. Behind the scenes, people don't know what's actually going on because informal conversation are always taking place. And we need to keep pushing those conversations. In terms of announcements, we want to make sure that everybody comes to considers visiting on March 6th in Selma, Alabama. We'll be participating in the Edmund Pettus Bridge Bloody Sunday March. So we want everybody to try to come out to that if possible. We really want to get as many brothers out there. Brother Gillarm came last year. And it was a beautiful thing to see at least 2,000 Prince Hall Masons and Eastern Stars going across the bridge in lockstep in unity across that, because again, the hidden hand of Prince Hall Freemasonry, we've always been there, no matter what, in every step of the way in terms of African American life. We're always there. We're always pushing the envelope. In addition, we want to make sure that everybody participates in, if you have any more additional questions, shoot it on the Facebook page and pose those to us. We'll try to answer those as honestly as possible. While we might not agree on a lot of the subjects, we definitely want to make sure everybody's stays informed. But again, the dialogue is always there. Roll Tide, and we'll see you guys next time. Oh yeah, next month's episode. Dave, you want to give it to him?
Absolutely. Next month's episode, if you do not have the book, you might want to purchase it by Brother Damian Jack. It's the link to where to purchase his book is going to be posted on the event page, so you might want to purchase it. If you don't already have it, read through it. We're going to have him on the show to discuss it. And do my parting comments as we do a great job identifying problems, but now we got to actually identify a solution. In this address, it's a 1933 address given by Grandmaster John Wesley Dobbs. He goes through the financial aspect of our Grand Lodge. In that financial aspect, he said we need to adopt the Texas plan. In the Texas plan, he says that he identifies how they were running their operations, and if we do the exact same thing that they did, our Grand Lodge will become financially stable after the Great Depression. We did that. We became financially stable. Membership started to rise. So as we were doing our pre-show, we found out that adopting the Texas plan in current days was actually the Oklahoma plan, and that is establishing recognition without visitation initially. Let the members get used to each other. I don't know if I will feel comfortable going down to Willacoochee, Georgia, visiting a lodge under Grand Lodge of Georgia, and Willacoochee is a real place in Georgia. This is not made up. So, and I don't know how comfortable some of their members will feel attending some of our lodges. So let's get used to each other. Once we get used to each other, we get used to working with each other, then maybe we can establish visitation as well. So as we come up with a possible solution, it may not be pretty initially, but maybe establishing recognition without visitation initially may be the way to go. And as always, thank you for tuning into the Prince Hall Think Tank for upcoming stuff. Since the last show, I'm now officially the executive director of the Columbus Black History Museum and Archives. This is where I'm broadcasting from now. If you come here, for the ones that have been into the museum, not only do I cover Black history, I cover Prince Hall history, and I go from African Lodge all the way to present day, and some of my current members, including Brother and Congressman Sanford Bishop. So thank you all for attending our show, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Root for the Knicks, and as always, the world champion, the 11-time world champion St. Louis Cardinals. Have a good night.